Hey, what's up, Trust Engine Mortgage Coach community? I am sitting down again with Brian Hale. In my mind, having a super important conversation around Moneyball mortgage. I interviewed Jim Deutsch last week, and that interview has gone viral. I've had over 1,200 views of it. A number of mortgage executives reaching out, going, "Let's do that." Also, people having challenges. So I wanted to get on get on Zoom and talk to Brian Hale. For anyone that doesn't know who Brian Hale is, there's only probably a couple of you watching this right now. But he's a iconic executive, has been a CEO of a number of large mortgage companies, and now is a mentor and coach to companies. A lot of the M&A transactions that are taking place, Brian's on one side of the other of a lot of the M&A taking places. And he also has a lot of people that have worked for him in one role or another that are running companies right now. So he's got a pretty unique visibility into both the C-suite and originator. He was also, once upon a time, a several $100 million a year producer. Is that right? Were you really doing a couple hundred?
Except that the loans were really small then, Dave.
Yeah.
So my loan average when I was an originator on the street, I'm embarrassed to say this, was $55,000 per loan.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You got me beat.
Which answers why I had to do 1,000 loans a year to make any money. Right.
Well,
so
it does say that, hey, you have empathy for the loan officers, and you also understand the dynamics of the C-suite. So also shout out to anyone that's on the fence about going to Housing Wire. Brian and I are going to be doing a Moneyball panel with James Heck, the sales head of production of all channels for New Res. So that should be great. And if you're on the fence, if you're an executive and you're on the fence, if you should go to Austin, the answer is yes, you should go there. So Brian, what did you think about that conversation with Jim, and what do you think some of the key points were within that conversation?
Yeah, look, first, before I do that, let me just say, by the way, yours and my last interview on my LinkedIn had 12,000 views, right, of that interview that you and I did when I posted it. So I think there's a fair amount of interest around all of these conversations. And I've got just a ton of feedback from people, as a result of you putting it up on your YouTube channel and also my LinkedIn. As for Jim, first of all, I find Jim to be one of the most profound thinkers in the business. I have an immense regard for him and his practice and what he does. We've actually tried to do a couple of deals together. It hasn't worked out, but not for a lack of trying or desire on my part, or I suspect his part, to figure out how to do that. So I have a lot of regard for his view. And I've always, what I know of Jim's practice, he brings a real defined financial and KPI, key performance indicator type methodology to everything he does with the lenders that he works with, at the C-suite or other levels within the organization. So just by way of background, hell of a get for you from an interview standpoint, and I appreciate it. Look, a lot of my takeaways, first of all, I love the interview, but it's probably because Jim and I think you are aligned in this concept. You put a phrase or a brand around it as Moneyball mortgage. I know it as granular analysis, granular financial and KPI analysis, right? Helping both companies from the corporate view, from the C-suite, the CFO, chief of production perspective, but also from an originator, branch manager perspective, to understand the relative value of the originator to the company and how to scorecard those things by risk weighting or importance weighting certain issues, be it volume, clearly an important one, dollar volume, unit volume, revenue, price exceptions, credit bureaus pulled, conversion rates of leads, those kinds of things. And my biggest takeaway out of that conversation, and frankly, just out of all of this, is, it sounds campish to say this, but if you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. And that's true whether you're a CEO, COO, CFO, pick some of the alphabet, it doesn't matter, or you're an LO. If you don't know the numbers and you don't know your impact on your company, I think you're missing it. And look, there were a couple of years here in 2020 and 2021 that, perhaps people got really, I'll use the word lazy around thinking about that kind of analysis. And then, of course, what's happened, Dave, as you know better than most, is, like somebody turned off the light switch right on the industry. And the industry volume shrank 75, 80% overnight. The entire world changed. Everything happened, fastest interest rate increase. And so all of a sudden, people got lazy on their own analysis. I don't think, as you and I've discussed before, I think really top flight originators, for the most part, want to understand their value and their economics and how they rank and how they scorecard within their company. But I think a lot of originators have really never focused on this piece, and they don't understand why their boss is frustrated with them, or why policies are changing, or they feel like their pricing is off, or whatever the case may be. And they're going about doing a lot of activity without necessarily realizing the impact to the company. So that's probably my biggest takeaway, is this concept of if you're not focused on the data, if you're not focused on the analysis, if you're not scorecarding these things, you really don't know as a company where your true value is coming from out of your sales force. And secondly, as an originator, you don't know your value to the company if you don't have this sorted out.
Yeah, love what you said. So I want to pull up a couple slides and walk through a concept and then get your impressions on this, Brian. So, just for anyone that didn't watch that other interview, I'll put a link down below to it. Also, my interview with Brian, it was called Halftime Report. The most recent one I do with Brian. It's been watched over 1,100 times. And I'll bet you this, kind of like Moneyball Mortgage is a little bit of a sexier headline. I'll bet you this one goes viral. But so for anyone watching this, what Jim did is he just, anonymized a study he did for a lender. This is real data. And he said, this is not atypical data, in terms of the results. And the top tier, most profitable loan officers are, contributing about 2,400 to the bottom line. The middle tier is losing 366. He said sometimes they're making a couple hundred, sometimes they're losing a couple hundred. And then the bottom tier, least profitable, are just eating all the profits, and he really called it out that when you look at the forced mergers that are taking place, or the forced sales, and the company's going out of business, this is what's happening. So first question is, Brian, do you validate that? Like this is the killer in the market right now, that, not managing this tier either up or out of the business?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. Look, the absolute math, as I'm sure Jim would agree, the absolute math will change by company, right? In terms of how that data breaks out, in terms of the bottom line impact. And when we talk about contribution to the bottom line, when I looked at Jim's numbers on that chart you just had up, I don't know if it's absolutely contribution to the bottom line, but it's certainly the contribution that the originator can control in the process. And those three tiers make sense to me. And I think in the most simplistic way to think about it, if the majority of your sales force as a company is in tier 2 and 3, your future's not bright, because what it's doing is robbing the economics of the tier 1 originators that you do have. And, not to confuse industry icons here, Todd Duncan used to have this great saying that, if you focused on the top 40% of your sales force, that's really where both volume and, I suspect, revenue and bottom line performance is typically living in your company. And, what we all do is we get ourselves in positions where we think, well, I can't really focus on that second tier or the third tier because, oh, by the way, Billy Bob in the third tier is good relationship with his brother who's in the first tier. And by the way, that's a branch manager that affects a lot of my people. And they're kind of it becomes I can't make any moves for fear of breakage, for fear of these folks could leave the company if I'm critical, or I sit down and explain, by the way, you're losing $5,800 a loan for me, right? In the process, it's going to be breakage. And my answer back is, break what? If you're writing a $5,800 check every time that originator closes a loan, break what? And so it's still, I have probably a controversial view of this, which is it's really about courage and the ability to convey these concepts in a way that originators and branch managers and heads of production and CFOs and CEOs can have those conversations with their people and not break it, right? It's about sitting down and going through this math and finding ways. Is it fixable? Is it just the person doesn't know or understand how they're impacting their company? And if they did, they would fix it? Or is the originator taking the position of, yeah, these sound like problems. They just don't sound like my problems. You figure it out. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I have a simple view that's, in 2020 and 21, you could afford that originator. You really couldn't, but you didn't notice it. You didn't feel it. Now it's life and death of companies. If you have a predominance of those kinds of originators that take the position of, I'm going to do what I want, and you don't have the courage and or the capacity to convey these concepts and sit down and help people, amend their approach, then your die is cast, my opinion.
Yeah. So tell me, what your thoughts are this, and I couldn't agree more. So, I asked him, what's the biggest differentiator between the top tier and the bottom tier? And, he said, it's concessions,
Yes.
cure and concessions. And so, my first message is, and we all know this, what gets measured, it improves. But conversion, as I really look at the best practices of loan officers that have low conversions, they're the same best practices that drive conversion. And conversion, every loan officer can see, like, I get a raise when if I can talk to 10 people and convert one extra, like, I win. And so one of my thoughts, and tell me what your thought is on this, is that conversion is the number one metric that lenders should focus on, because if they're driving and teaching habits and best practices that drive conversion, they're going to also be driving best practices that reduce concessions. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Dave, this is, I always try to agree with you because I think you're a great thinker on these topics, but in this one, I might have a slightly different view, which, by the way, I agree with saying, let's look at conversion first. But the follow-up question, and I read a great book years ago about the QBQ, the question behind the question, right? And the question behind the question here is, you and I are originators, and you have like a 95% conversion. I have a 60% conversion. But the way you're getting the 95 conversion is you're taking 150 basis point PE, price exception, on every loan. I'm taking a 10 basis point price concession on every loan. I can tell you, as a guy who's owned a few P&Ls in my life, I like the 60% guy more than I like the 95% guy or gal, because in truth, the mortgage business is not a business where you can cut your revenue to substandard levels and make it up in volume. All you do is lose money at an ever increasing rate. And so there is a fixed cost to the business, there's a variable cost to the business, and then there's revenue. And if that revenue is not there, so if, by the way, and this is why scorecarding, I think, is critical, if, by the way, you're a 90% converter and you use nominal price exceptions to do it, then you're the king of that organization, because you're getting both great conversion through sales skills, an ability to align the consumer with the right product for their needs and not have to give the price away to make it happen, and to use sales, sometimes we forget that, as opposed to a checkbook. If everybody gave their money away, people would line up and you'd be a big producer. That's effectively what happens when somebody has exceptionally high conversion and exceptionally ridiculously high price exceptions in the market, where, if you think about it from a boxer's perspective, you've heard the old phrase, don't lead with your chin, right? Don't lead into the punch with your chin. That's all an originator is doing. If they're taking ridiculous PEs, they're leading in with their chin. They're taking a punch and they're going, hey, I'm a hero. And by the way, because of comp rules, the company cannot reduce my commissions on that loan for taking a big PE. So I get paid either way, and the company loses, and eventually the company goes away. Bad things happen to good companies that don't make money.
Yeah, well, first of all, you and I agree wholeheartedly on that. And since that interview, I've interviewed a number of top producing loan officers, and I've done a number of interviews because one of my goals, given my role in the industry, the number of loan officers that I've interviewed, this YouTube channel that we have, is that I think I can really move the needle with loan officers and get them to think. First of all, think of your concession, what you're costing the company, as your sales skills. If you have some of the highest conversion and some of the lowest concessions, you're a great value salesperson. You
also have immense value in the industry.
Yes, exactly. So I've walked a few loan officers through this, just kind of showing the cost of, when you don't get a RESPA app. I have seen every loan officer I've shown this to, that when you look at the cost of withdrawn loans, they're just like, wow, my boss has told me about that, but I never really realized it. And so, I think that companies, need to be courageous, need to practice extreme, transparency, and really walk their loan officers through what this looks like, and talk about, not only conversion, I call this conversion in the funnel, but conversion outside the funnel. I mean, this is actually a bigger problem. I think it's at least 4x the opportunity if you just did a better job of managing your database and turning your database into loans. I think that's another big opportunity. But here's my question for you, Brian. Kind of coming from that conversation, really like, hey, how can we help the industry? My role at Trust Engine, both with a technology platform and with a YouTube channel like this, that we come up with this Moneyball mortgage algorithm. And again, this is for loan officers. So, conversion is number one, concessions number two. And by the way, these are all being measured. Conversion above the funnel. And then we flip the switch. We put number of closed loans and apps, volume and number of closed loans at the bottom. What are your thoughts on this algorithm? And be candid. Like, if I don't have it right, I want to get it right.
I think it's very close. I think number one and number two are essentially 1 and 1A, right? One can't really be measured without the other. You could kind of lose it. But the way I would think of doing the algorithm, David, is I would look at it on a weighted basis, meaning, what is it you want from an originator? Obviously, you want funded volume with reasonable revenue, low PEs, compliant originations, right? You want all those things. And so however you build an algorithm, you can build it on a weighted basis that says, conversion is 1, PEs is 0.9 or 0.95, right? In terms of the weight, and keep working out to determine how you scorecard and do that. I think the other component of this, and I think it goes underanalyzed in the industry today. And you had that little funnel. One of the things that's happening, and I get why it happens, is all companies have moved to try to give their buyer and their realtor or builder, whoever they're working with, the best negotiation leverage in terms of getting a transaction done. So everybody wants not a pre-qual, they want a pre-approval. They want a fully approved buyer. So the buyer is trading as cash in the market, right? Saying, I'm locked in, ready to go. I recently saw a company where there was an originator in one branch, and they had a lot of branches. One branch had 400 pre-approved loans in the drawer, some of which had been sitting in the drawer for 12 or 14 months, were constantly being remanufactured. So, long-winded way of saying, I don't know that it fits into your algorithm, but I think at some level it probably should, which is, what's the number of pre-approvals that you're going beyond the credit pull? And what's the cost to manufacture that pre-approval? Because that piece, when I looked at Jim's chart that you put up, that piece, that manufacturing cost, if you were building a factory and you were building widgets, that would be the stuff that doesn't get out the other end of the factory, right? It fell in the trash or got out for quality purposes or whatever. But you still have the manufacturing cost, the salaries, the work, the compliance, all of that stuff that you have to look at. And then if it denies, you got, cancellation team or the default team, withdrawal team to do, the denials on those kinds of things. Point is, it's not free. Pre-approvals are not free. And they're like a supercharged form of that top of the funnel of credit pulls. And then, one of the reasons you see people with massive credit pull numbers, they've credit pulled the same consumer and manufactured them 5 times. And that has to be managed. That has to be managed, right?
Yeah.
And from a sales standpoint, I want my customer Dave to feel like he's empowered when he finds that deal. Let's go, right? We want to help the realtor, we want to help the buyer, we want to help the builder, we want to help everybody. But there's a real cost to it, and how you manage that cost and how you help the originator understand what that is doing to your cost of fulfillment. If you're taking 2 loans to close 1, this is a really hard business. If you're taking 3 loans to close 1, I'm not sure you can make money today. And so,
really good point, Brian. And I don't think this slide of Jim's is taking that into account, like that.
By the way, I'm not saying Jim's slide's wrong.
There's more meat on the bones,
right.
There's even more costs. So like this 78 basis points is underestimating the cost in today's market. And then also, everyone watching this doesn't include concessions. So this particular funnel, concessions aren't built into this. And I spent some time with Optimal Blue last week at the Mortgage Collaborative event, and I got some data that saying that the average conversion or the average concession right now is 80 basis points, and more than 50% of loans have concessions. So guys, this is like, when you look at all of this drainage in the funnel, and then you look at the drainage of concessions, and then here's what I know, because I run MortgageCoach, and we do this all the time. The lenders where they have loan officers following the best practices, they're getting a better conversion than loan officers that don't use MortgageCoach. They're getting less. This is the most I've seen, by the way. The average is about a 11 to 15 basis point impact. But my message to the industry, and tell me whether you agree with this, Brian, like, this should be lenders' number 1 priority right now, because you don't have to fire anyone to do this. You need to use your BI smart. You need to start looking at conversion and concessions. You need to scorecard this with your loan officers, and then you need to drive best practices around this. So like, why wouldn't anybody do this?
Yeah. So Dave, let me just add one thing, right? I think sometimes, and I see this in some clients that I've worked with in the past or companies I've been inside over the last year, people get hung up a little bit on the concept of BI, because I've heard companies say to me, look, we don't have the resources to have our BI be this sophisticated. Okay, let's just take an Excel sheet. Let's put 8 columns across the top. Let's load in the data, right? Almost every company I go into, and there are exceptions, almost every company I go into say, we don't have that data. 100% of the time, they have the data. They don't have the data well organized. That's true. Or they can't really find it or put it on a page, those kinds of things. I don't know if you've ever noticed, Dave, my company's name is Mortgage Advisory Partners, and I have a little tagline underneath, right? Granular analysis, strategic direction. It's always been the case. And I think it's the sin of the industry to some degree. I maybe just react to it because I've always been around this. I've had the good fortune to be around a lot of people who get this. People have a tendency to use what I call big bucket accounting, where they don't break the numbers down to the incremental pieces. they add two numbers together, they mash the numbers together, and then they divide them by another number, and they think they have something, but it really doesn't tell the story. You've got to get it to the granular level and then build it back up so you can tell a story around it. So things like manufacturing cost and underwriting cost, and well, we're doing a bunch. I've got a whole pipeline of pre-approvals. Well, what was the cost to your underwriter, your most expensive resource in fulfillment? And all I use on this as a little bit of evidence of my evangelism around this. And you see this data come out of the MBA, out of Frantantoni's group at the MBA all the time. The industry has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on technology in the last couple of years. Yet the cost to manufacture a loan in Q2 of this year has never been higher. And the promise of technology is lower cost, right? It's more efficient. We take the people out of the process. We use AI. We do all these things. Well, part of it is because the unit volume has dropped, overnight, right? So it's caught some people. It's not all, it's a little hocus pocus. But in truth, we haven't got it. And part of it is people cannot tell you what the incremental cost of underwriting is in their company, or the incremental cost of failed efforts, or failed credit bureaus, or failed pre-approvals. If you don't know that, I'm sorry, how are you running your business? And I don't say that, I don't say it to be an ass. I don't say it to be pejorative with people. But there's a very fine line in this business. I had a great mentor. One of his great phrases was, there's a fine line in this business between being busy and a busy damn fool. And the difference is data. Data. And people tend not to invest in the analytics side. It is what my company does, by the way. We have really brilliant analytics folks that can come in, take your data, show it back to you very quickly, and point to the problem with some solutions. That's in some places, not all, some places that's a lost art, right? And so people start making decisions based on how their gut feels instead of what the math actually says.
Yeah, no, Brian, one of the things why you and I think just connect so well strategically is that tagline, granular analysis and strategic direction. And I was not good in English in school, was the worst speller, but I was good in math. And I've always just found like win with numbers. When I founded MortgageCoach, it was loan officers were like, hey, here's your rate, here's your payment, here's your cash to close. And I'm like, wait a minute. If we showed the cost over time, if we showed options, like winning with data is something I've kind of like done my whole business life. What are your thoughts on this data point?
By the way, Dave, can I just add a comment to that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
It is my view, and this will be a controversial statement. I may make this at the Housing Wire event that we're at. I think a lot of people, I don't know if it's a majority, but many don't want to know that analysis. Because when you're faced with the analysis, you either have to act on it or deny it and be culpable for being aware of the problem and not doing anything about it. So it's hard if I show you, here's the math, Dave, and you go, okay, I get it, but I choose not to do anything about it. That's a strategy. It's not to be a winning strategy, but it's a strategy, right? It's denial ain't just a river in Egypt strategy.
No, that is bold, and I'm sure that is true in some cases for sure. So I interviewed Sean Herrero this morning, and he had just found out that he was the top 5 loan officer this month trending at Cross Country, which is a very large platform. And I was interviewing him, trying to just like, how are you doing so well? And like, what are you doing? Of course, he's a mortgage coach, so there was some mortgage ideas that came out. But an idea came out of this that I think you're going to like is he said he knew his numbers because I was talking to him about conversion. And he said the conversion number that matters most right now is lead to in contract. Like I'm getting business from all the top realtors because there is no one that can, not only do a pre-qual, but provide, now he uses a mortgage coach total cost analysis to get that home under contract, like lead to contract. And his number was 26 days. And my takeaway
from lead to contract,
lead to it's under contract, it's in escrow. And my takeaway from that is that needs to go into Moneyball right now, because one, it would put some accountability for all the loan officers that have these 1 year perpetual pre-approvals, if we were literally measuring your lead to contract rate. And then I also thought, like, if I'm a realtor in this tough, brutal market, I want to work with a loan officer and a mortgage professional that's tracking lead to contract and can do that better than anyone else. Like, it's almost like one of those metrics that helps you get more referrals from agents, and it helps you drive a profitable mortgage practice. Thoughts?
No doubt. Well, first of all, last week, I can't give you a lot of details on this because it's a client, but I spent 3 days last week in a room with 3,000 of the top 2% of realtors in the United States. Mm-hmm. In a couple of breakout sessions they talked about what they look for in a mortgage originator. Very insightful. One of the things today, they expect half of their volume. I shouldn't say all expect half. Many expect half of their volume as a realtor to come from their mortgage partner.
Wow.
That the mortgage partner is in the market, effectively using social media, effectively positioning themselves in the marketplace, driving leads to them that are not necessarily coming through the agent, and then taking those leads back to the agent and working collaboratively with the agent and adding value beyond, yes, I can take your customer's mortgage app and I can pre-approve them, or I can pre-qualify them, or I can do, whatever myriad of things you're going to ask of me. But way better than bringing a box of donuts, here's a commission. Here's a transaction. Here's a lead from outside the realtor's lead funnel that wasn't part of their funnel, but was brought in by their mortgage partner, right, in the process. And so if you start to think about that, and oh, by the way, the top 2% of realtors in America last year did almost 75% of all sales in America. So is this an important group? Yeah, I think so. And secondly, understanding how they're thinking about it. So I suspect this gentleman you interviewed is working at the very upper end of the real estate echelon, has that depth of relationship, brings value. To that degree, Dave, my view is that hasn't changed in my 41 years in the business materially. Now, the process and the approach and the mechanics and the tools and the social media and everything else has changed, clearly. It's more complicated. Yes, let's just stipulate it's hard. Yes, it's hard. There's no easy button. What's the old Staples commercial with the easy button? There's no easy button.
No, there's no easy button. So I'm going to close out with one more kind of data point, and then I want to just close out getting actionable. So one of the things, the way we build our platform, we're building a performance marketing platform. That's what Trust Engine is. And we're focused on, lenders lose a fortune above the funnel, like before we even, we have databases and we're losing loans from that. They're losing more than 50% of their loans in the funnel between credit report and RESPA app. They're losing millions on withdrawn loans. And then of course, they're losing, tens of millions in price concessions. Like, these are the four biggest points. Any comments on that? Like, are those the four? Did I miss one? How would you rank those? And then I want to just close out with some ideas on how to
I think you have the right four. I would maybe give you some, if those were all A-level issues, I'd give you some A- or B-level issues that I think are also very material. The lack of originator confidence and knowledge and skill set with the entire product line that the company may offer is costing companies money. It's been my experience through my career that salespeople of all varieties, retail, wholesale, you name it, tend to avoid positioning product that they don't understand well, because the consumer is going to ask them some difficult question. They're not going to know the answer, and they think it invalidates them somehow as a salesperson or a guide through the swamp of home ownership, right? It's, they're positioning themselves as the expert in the process. And I see companies having product galore. Now everybody's trying to outproduct everybody, right? With, oh, it's only 1% down, and it's this and it's that, and it's all these things, right? Trying to outdo the next guy. But if your sales force doesn't know how to position those products and to analyze the buyer through really sharp analytics at the front end of what the buyer's needs, desires, abilities, and financial situation allows or drives them, and you get a withdrawal as a result, can you think of a worse reason to suffer the cost of credit bureau and pre-qual and pre-approval and all those kinds of things, and the deal doesn't work and somebody withdraws or gets denied without offering them a product that the company has that could have otherwise done the deal? And little things that I see companies doing as a second piece is, people tend to do a lot of bond, the realtors, builders, others want you to have every bond program that you can possibly have. And you have one originator who's doing 60% bond loans and one originator who's doing 6% bond loans. So and I know you know this, and most of your audience knows this, not all loans are created equal from a revenue and or cost standpoint. Bond loans are materially difficult to close right. Sometimes you close them twice, sometimes you close them 3 times to get it right. And there's capped and limited revenue, and you still have to pay the originator a full commission. You take that originator versus another originator who doesn't drive that kind of conversion, or doesn't take the easy way out, or finds a better product for the consumer's need, not from a, hey, I'm going to get more revenue if I get this loan, because the originator is agnostic to revenue, but it's the right product for the consumer, yet is also the right product for the house. That guy or gal is just worth their weight in gold. I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable. So product usage, product knowledge, training. I see people rolling out products, and I talk to their originators and they don't know how to sell it. They don't know the details. They don't know why and how they're going to use a certain non-QM product that could fix the problem, make them a hero with the realtor. They take a withdrawal and it goes into that chart you just had up on the screen. So I just think it's
really good ad, product mix, product expertise, and ability to be able to strategically position and strategically sell that. One of the things we do in Mortgage Coach is we actually encourage lenders that when you roll out a product, don't just roll it out and give the transactional guidelines, give the sales strategy, teach them how to strategically sell that product. And we actually automate and power a lot of that. But you had another comment?
I was just going to add one last piece, because it's like maybe this is the dinosaur in me, Dave, and so I'll own it. I'm an old guy. Long time since I originated loans. I think woolly mammoths walked the face of the earth back then. But I see originators today turning themselves into a bad version of Rocket. And by the way, it's no knock on Rocket. Those guys are all smart guys over there. What I mean by that is they don't spend the time with the consumer that they need to spend to develop that lead and gain trust at the earliest possible point. I'm seeing people have a link to a 1003 and website and social media and all those things, trying to drive the consumer to self-originate to make them more efficient as an app taker in the process. Yet and then they'll talk to the consumer. Consumer wants a price quote. They immediately quote the price without developing what the consumer's true needs and desires are in that process. So what have you done? You've turned yourself into a rate quote and a link to a 1003. You've turned yourself into a call center originator, and you're not nearly as good or as skilled as they are at it. They don't, your company's not backing it up with $200 million of marketing a month and being on every sports, thing in the world. Having that depth, look, 2 things as an originator. If I was coaching an originator today, and that's what you do for a living, I'm not answering what's your price until I know what the consumer's needs, desires, and situation is, because I believe as an originator, it's malpractice. How could I possibly quote you a price? I don't know anything about you. I don't know what you're trying to get done. I don't know about your family. I don't know how long you're going to be in the house. I don't know any of those things. And just having you self-originate on a link to a 1003, I think you get picked off 87 different ways on that deal versus let me get on the phone and co-originate with you. Let's spend an hour or two with you. And that seems anathemic to a lot of originators today. I just want to push these things out and then have my PA follow up. One of the things I heard from those top realtors last week, you know what really pisses them off? Is they finally decide to do business with you and you hand me or my customer off to your PA. I decided to do business with you. You show up, you deal with it, you take the heat, not your assistant. And I mean, there was a panel of them that to a person said, instant turnoff. I'm not valuable enough. My business is not valuable enough for you to invest your personal time in the transaction. Have a nice day. Last deal I'm giving you.
Yeah, well, and you know how you if you are that guy or that girl, is what's your conversion? What are your concessions? And if you're in the top 10% of highest conversion with lowest concessions, you're not that person. And if you're in the bottom 50%, and here's the deal, you can fix it. So my goal,
yes,
mortgage professional listening to this, like, where do you, what are your conversions? You know, credit report to close loan. That's easy to figure out. And what are your concessions? Go ask your manager if you don't know them. You know, my message to the executives listening to this is it's time for extreme transparency. It's time for courageous, our CEO, Rich Harris, calls it courageous authenticity. Like, yes, if you have truth, and it will make the business stronger. And by the way, it will make the mortgage professionals that you lead stronger and more professional. Show up with extreme authenticity, show up with extreme transparency, and start playing Moneyball Mortgage. What are your closing thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, look, truth will set you free, right? It is, you know, it is true. Look, I tend to get enthusiastic about these points and maybe a little controversial, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think the folks who, and maybe I'm sure there's always an exception. There's always exceptions to anything out there, but generally, if you find the highest performing folks around those metrics you just described, they're investing their personal time, they're building a relationship with the consumer early, and often you need to be the most trusted trust engine, the most trusted guide through the swamp of homeownership there is. And I don't think you do it by handing it off to somebody else, sending a link and hoping to God they respond, and that you can catch up when everybody else is all over them already.
So Brian, I want to make sure people know how to follow you. You've got an incredible LinkedIn profile. You know, I recommend every executive and loan officer, you know, follow this guy on LinkedIn. Where can people contact you if they want to bring you in to, you know, get into the granular analysis and strategic direction?
Our website's www.mortgageap, A as in Apple, P as in Peter.com, Mortgage Advisory Partners, mortgageap.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Brian Hale, H-A-L-E. And, you know, my email direct is bhale@mortgageap.com. Very simple. My cell phone is up on my LinkedIn account. It's we have 6 different ways you can contact us through the website, and I'll be on stage with Dave at Housing Wire, and you know, my intent there, Dave, is to, you know, set the place on fire, and you're going to have to show up with the fire extinguisher. How's that?
Well, I'm not going to show up with a fire extinguisher. I'm going to join you in creating a lot of
I'll be silverback gorilla on stage on this thing, man.
Yeah.
Just throwing the grass.
No, it's all good. I'm really looking forward to that and having James, share his perspective.
Great ad. Talk about a guy who uses data. Great way to think of it. There are others out there as well. It should be a great session. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So hope you got value from this. I recorded this in September of 2023, and for all of August and September, I'm doing what's called the Mortgage Coach 10X. You could go to mortgagecoach.com/10X, and it's just dedicated to doing training on how to turn loan officers into advisors that have optimized conversion, optimized concessions. And again, my theory is if you fix this now, one, you can be profitable right now. And what you had to do to fix it now will help you grow faster and bigger in the future. So let's go. Brian, thank you, brother. I really appreciate your time.
David, as always, thank you. I appreciate what you do for the industry and focusing on these kinds of topics. So thank you for inviting me to be part of that.
Yeah, well, thank you for being part of it, and I'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Hope you got value.